Are we live? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's event looking at improving the appointment process of top leadership in the criminal justice system and investigation and prosecutorial agencies. My name is Gareth Newham. I'm the head of the Justice and Violence Prevention Program at the Institute for Security Studies, and I want to welcome you all here today. I want to start by just thanking the European Union very much for funding this event. This is part of a technical support fund that they give to organizations working in the anti-corruption sphere or accountability sphere in South Africa. And I also want to thank the members of the ISS Partnership Forum, which include the Hansard Foundation, the European Union, the Open Society Foundations, and the governments of Denmark, Ireland, Netherlands, Norway, and Sweden. Today's event is the start of a series of events that Institute for Security Studies will be hosting, looking at what it's called the Driving Justice series, transforming systems and empowering communities. We did a lot of work over the period of state capture, looking at how leadership appointments were made in the criminal justice system, looking at the performance of the criminal justice agencies, how they are performed given their budgets and the impact of that performance. And this lot was made available to the Zondo Commission, but unfortunately they didn't really focus very much on the criminal justice system as a whole. But we do realize and recognize that the situation as it stood during the state capture years, in terms of how people were appointed to top leadership positions, how the organizations are managed in terms of their performance indicators and budgeting processes, hasn't really changed much. And so this is part of a series to really, hopefully, focus the minds of the new administration, which will be in place in June this year, as to what are the practical things that they can do to really improve the functioning of our criminal justice system, of our investigation agencies, of our anti-corruption capability, so that we have a much better chance at a prosperous future for all South Africans and all people in South Africa. If we don't change things, and we do have a situation again in which our president or the leadership, the most senior politicians, are not completely wedded to the rule of law, are open to illicit financial activity, to corruption, our country doesn't have the same kind of buffer as it did in 2009. So things could get much worse. But we do believe that most people in South Africa, most people want to improve the country, most people are interested in working for a better country for all. And therefore, we hope that together with civil society, with different sectors, people in government, in the private sector, and across different components of our society, can work together to try and really work with the new administration to fix some of these shortcomings, to make improvements to the law, to the various regulations, to the ways in which these organizations perform and how they measure their impact, so that we can really see a measurable difference moving forward in South Africa. We can't have a situation where our criminal justice system is faced with a year-on-year increase in the murder rate for 12 years and doesn't change the way it responds to that. Or a criminal justice system that is not able to be at the cutting edge of new threats, particularly in the cybersphere, or new ways in which organized crime manifest, and not be able to respond to that proactively. So we really have to see big reforms in the way that we think about these organizations, what their priorities are, how they appoint their leadership, and how they measure their impact on safety for all people in South Africa. And so that is why we exist as an institution, and why we also understand that we need to work in partnership with different sectors, with people who are of the same values, have the same vision and mission of trying to improve safety for all people in government and across all other sectors, NGOs, private sector, unions, academia, you name it. So that is today's, the kickoff of the series that I've mentioned. I want to now just remind those that the session for this morning is an open session. It is being live streamed, so Chatham House rules do not apply. Only say things you're quite happy to be quoted as saying if you are answering questions or making statements in this session. After tea, we'll be having a closed session. In other words, people can't just quote you and you're free to say what you like in this. You can only be quoted if people ask your explicit permission. But at this point, I'd like to hand over to our moderator for this morning, Executive Director for the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution. I'm sure no stranger to everybody in the room. Lawson Naidu. He's going to moderate this morning's panel. And so I'll hand over to you, Lawson. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gareth. Good morning to all of you. We've got limited time, so I'm going to try and maximize the opportunity that we have with Professor Chris Stone, who's online, as well as with Andy Montibi and Shamila Batoy here with me. And I want to use this really as a sort of fireside chat, as a conversational piece, drawing on your personal experiences that will hopefully shed some light on the discussion, the more technical discussions that will happen during the course of the day. Because I think where you've come from, the experience that you've had in the leadership positions within the NPA, the SRU, and Professor Stone, having studied these issues over a long period of time, can really help to shed some light on where we are. So Shamila, I'm going to start with you. You were appointed in 2019 after, for the very first time, after a very rigorous public process. A panel, interviews conducted in public. And I'd like you to share with us your reflections on that experience of what that process was for you personally, but also what it said to the rest of the country in terms of appointing the head of the justice sector.
No, thank you, Lawson. It would have been nice if it was a fireside chat and it was just you and I chatting with Andy maybe on the side. It's, I think firstly to say that, when I was first approached to put my name into the hat as national director, I said no, because I was really, I was at the time at the International Criminal Court, and I knew what was happening in South Africa, and was really sadly watching from the sidelines, about what was going on, and feeling a lot of pain because the National Prosecuting Authority was my home for a number of years before I went to the International Criminal Court, and left the NPA feeling quite sore at the time, because we were doing lots of exciting things post-apartheid South Africa, looking at transformation issues, access to justice. And I left in 2009. And so when I was asked to, consider putting my name into the hat, I said no, because, having just witnessed from afar what was going on in South Africa, particularly in the NPA, I realized it's not something I want to do, because I knew that it was going to be something that was going to, anonymity was going to be just, out of the window, peace of mind, which is priceless. And those are things I had in the Netherlands and I treasure. And of course, the whole issue of taking a drop in your salary and giving all of that up. And so when I eventually decided to do that, and I've said this before, it was because I realized that I have it is my obligation to my country. And I mean an obligation in a true sense of the word. It's not, we have thousands of obligations that we think are obligations when they're not. But this is when you talk about a calling and you talk about really wanting to make a difference. This is what I thought, look, notwithstanding the attacks that may come, the peace of mind, the anonymity, all of that's going away, a reduction in salary. It was, I thought we needed to get into the ring and really try to do what we can as good people wanting to fight the good fight.
So having, contemplated it in that way, when you actually got into the ring and had to go through that process, at any stage of that process, did you regret entering the ring?
I have never done that. And that's the one thing I can say is they've been really difficult days. And I think that is what a national director, when you talk about what, you've got to realize that you are in for the long haul. And it's not something that you do because you think it's a nice to do and, it's the power and the prestige and all of that. I have never regretted a single day, notwithstanding times when we need to motivate ourselves because things can be quite difficult and challenging, both externally and internally within the broader JCPS. But I have, because of the commitment to really make a difference, I've never, ever a single day felt that it was the wrong decision.
Thanks. Before we move on to Andy, can you just share just your reflections on that process, particularly, you know, the interview process?
Yeah. Sorry, that was your key question. The process itself was, initially I was a bit surprised because it was a new process and we thought, you know, how is this going to pan out? And the idea of being interviewed live is quite daunting. But I think it was an excellent process. And it was really maybe a bit of a masterstroke on the part of the president to decide on that process. Because what it did is it was transparent, it allowed public participation, it allowed the country to actually see and assess for themselves who the potential candidates could be. And I think in that sense, it gave a lot of confidence to the people in terms of who especially given what had happened with the appointment of previous national directors. I think it gave a sense of confidence to the country. So I think that's an excellent process. And I think moving forward, but it was something the president decided. It's something that really civil society needs to think about. And what we're trying to do in the NPA, in all our efforts to really make sure that you know, we leave an NPA that's fit for purpose, that's more independent, that there can be legislative changes that actually incorporate this type of process. It may require constitutional change because it is the president's prerogative to appoint a national director, but you know, we are just exploring ways in which that can be done. So I think that was really a great process.
Thanks. I think many people in this room would have been involved over many years in advocating for that kind of open, transparent, competitive process for the leadership of various institutions within the criminal justice sector. I'm sure it's something that we'll come back to.
I want to say one thing though.
Yeah.
They should have had a woman on the panel.
There you go. Before I move over to Andy, just to acknowledge that Advocate Vusi Piccoli is joining us online, and I'm sure, unfortunately, he won't be able to contribute, but it would have been good to get his perspectives. And with a bit of luck, Shamila might be the first NDPP to finish her 7-year term as National Director in what, just under 2 years' time. But Andy, coming into you, I mean, there's presidential prerogative is what Shamila just said. And that also applies to your appointment. Yeah. And you were appointed as the head of the SIU back in 2016. But that process was shrouded in secrecy. So what I'd like is for you to share your experience of what that process was, how you came to put your name into the hat, and your experience of that process leading up to being appointed by the then president.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Lawson. And thank you very much for this opportunity really to share our experience and possibly our views. When I applied for this role, because you know, I was approached to apply. I think it's important to note the word apply. Throw in my CV. And at the time I was in corporate. I was in a company in the health sector, and having spent some time in the banking sector, and in both banks where I worked, I was the group head executive of risk management, and in the health sector I was the group head for governance, legal, compliance, and audit, right? So I'm giving that preface just so that the kind of role that I would apply to should really resonate with who I was and what I was looking for. Of course, applying back into the public sector really meant going back into the public sector for me, I suppose, similar to my colleague and the DPP here. I spent some time in the public sector. I had the privilege of being in a project that established the South African Revenue Service. and I see one of our leaders at the time is here, Ivan Pillay. We said at the time that we wanted to, were led by Minister Gordon at the time, that we really wanted to create a blueprint that other public sector could learn from, right? And values-driven competency, just really driven by achieving results, right? So that being the background, when I applied, shall I say I was lucky enough to be shortlisted, and I went for the interview, and of course, different to what my colleague went through, it wasn't public, but I'm certain that it was competitive, because I was not the only one who was interviewed. There were a number of other, candidates who were interviewed, and when I came to the interview, I remember talking to a colleague back in the company I worked for. I said, "You're going back to the public sector?" I said, "Yes, that's my intention." So the perception really was that, particularly at senior leadership level, right? You're really going there to burn your career, given the perception, But then, despite that, we went through. There was an interview panel. I think there was about 3 ministers and a DG in the presidency. Well, I can't recall who were the other 2 panelists, and I must say the interview was structured, was focused. I mean, as you would know, I mean, they all took turns in structuring, posing questions, and you could see daily that those questions, over and above being competency based, there was a question in terms of what are you bringing to the role, right? And of course, I was very vocal that the intention to come back to the public sector was really to contribute, having built up the kind of experience, and to contribute in a manner that would make a difference to the country. And I was really quite vocal, given the perception out there that, if I will not be allowed to execute on my function, I do not think that I will work well. I will not really be able to function. So I suppose as a panel, and the chair of the panel at the time, responded and said, no, this is the kind of institution that we would like to work with the necessary independence, and the kind of work that you'll execute will be, as we would always say, without fear, favor, and prejudice. But the interview, I think, lasted for just about 1 hour and a half, and then I left. So to your question, really, although it's not sure if it was shrouded in secrecy, but I think it was just not public. It was just not public. But I am really satisfied that you went through a competitive process, and the appointment process also came through, and then of course we had to negotiate. And the interesting part is when I got in, I mean, the appointment process lasted for almost 6 months, even into the job, right? And I'm mentioning that deliberately because I came to realize I wasn't really so aware. I came to realize that the head of the SIU, when I really wanted to sign the agreement and performance agreement and all of that, I came to realize that the head of the SAU is actually the terms and conditions were linked to the judges, you know, and I remember when I sort of negotiated to come in to avoid, to avoid a slip in the salary, they had pegged it to a certain level of a judge, and then and it was so interesting, to say, oh, okay. And then they said, no, okay, so that we don't really prejudice you, we'll peg you at that level of a judge, so I'm really making that deliberately to say, it might be, and this is just my observation, that from the time of the Heath Commission, when it translated into an entity, they really didn't deal much with the terms and conditions, and they left it, sort of left it as linked to the judges since then, but of course, I mean, you are not appointed similar to the judges and so on and so forth. But I really want to say that, the process, the way it went, I was satisfied that it was objective, competitive. There were no questions that seemed to suggest to me that, it looks like I'm going into a situation where I'm not going to be able to execute. And of course, if questions do come later, in terms of my view is that it really should be opened up to the public in a similar way. I think it really is. It's really a good process that is be transparent.
Thanks, Andy. I think
Thank you.
That's the opportune moment to move on to Chris, because what we've had described are two very different processes, but both of which were robust and competitive, and that I think is good. Clearly doesn't apply across the criminal justice sector, but certainly with these two institutions. So to bring you in now, Chris, you've heard, and thank you very much for joining us all the way from Abuja. I hope we're properly audible to you, and good to see you on the screen. You've engaged with these issues over many, many years. In particular, the process that's just been described by Andy, is that one that you see replicated elsewhere in the world? How does it stack up with with how other countries approach these senior appointments?
Absolutely. I mean, so first, huge thanks for inviting me to join. It's a very important issue, and I'm sorry I can't be there with you in person, but and I apologize for the background noise here, but I'm very, very grateful for the chance to be able to join. And I think, let me just make 3 quick points. So in terms of where this sits in international comparison. So the first is, I think it's important to distinguish whether the purpose of these selection processes, it's a different purpose to try and create a high quality appointee and the independence of that appointee. Those are different goals. And I think what Andy and Shamila illustrate is that any process in good hands can produce first-rate people. You have examples here of 2 processes that were not particularly statutorily structured to maximize independence, but that nonetheless produce excellent office holders. So it can be robust, as we've heard from Andy. It can be open, as we've heard from Shamila. That doesn't necessarily guarantee the independence. And I think distinguishing the goal of independence from quality is an important one when we're thinking about these processes. A colleague of Shamila and mine in Malawi, Martha Chizuma, was appointed through a very open, remarkably open, and statutorily open process as head of the Anti-Corruption Bureau. But the lack of independence in that role has been a huge burden for her in trying to carry out the job truly effectively. So I think it's important to distinguish the purpose. The second point is that you can't achieve independence just through the selection process. You have to look holistically at this project. And it's not just, if you just fix the selection process, you can't guarantee independence. It's a complex of the appointment process, the removal process, the funding, independence of funding, and those have to be seen holistically. So I think recommendations that come out of today's important meeting that ISS is holding need to situate the independence question in a holistic view about what makes the appointment process part of a larger structure of independence. But finally, I think it's very important to understand that too much independence can actually be a problem in itself. That is, the paradox of independence is that you want the freedom to be able to make decisions without fear or favor, on the merits every time, and without undue pressure from any quarter. On the other hand, these positions can't afford to become isolated. If without the trick of independence is if you make the position rigorously independent from every political authority, you can find yourself politically isolated, not just politically independent. And political isolation can doom an effective anti-corruption or prosecution service. And we've seen that all over the world. So you take an example in Sierra Leone, where Lara Taylor Pierce, the Auditor General, was suspended by a president unconstitutionally in terms of the independence of the Auditor General in Sierra Leone. It's a very strong structure embedded in the Constitution, giving her the same independence as a high court judge. So structurally, and in terms of her budget and reporting line to the parliament, it is a model of independence. But when a president unconstitutionally suspends her and removes her from office, there's no one there to defend her. Civil society protests briefly, but moves on to other issues. The press makes a fuss about it. But in the end, no one in the Congress, no one in the ministries, no one's there to support her, and she remains suspended despite a very delayed tribunal looking into it. So there are warnings here about the need for both independence and political support and backing in the project. And that's the trick. That is the real trick of independence. I think you have two examples with you, both Shamila and Andy, have tremendous support inside government as well as the independence to act against corruption when they find it. But that is a combination put together only through real skill in leadership, and real integrity in leadership and political support. So those are the 3 points. I think you have to understand the difference between an appointment process structured for robust results versus independence of action. And in thinking about independence, you have to think holistically, and you have to balance independence with political support that you need in the office.
Thanks, Chris. I mean, I think that's that sums it up nicely. Is that the process doesn't can serve to provide different kinds of outcomes. We've been very fortunate in that the 2 different processes have led to very, very good appointments. But when one looks, and I want to get your views on this, both Andy and Shamila. Would a public process necessarily produce a better outcome? We've seen many public processes, if one thinks of appointments that are done through Parliament, which are highly public and have not led to the kinds of quality of appointments that I have sitting alongside me here. And then just to throw in this sort of parallel, when following the appointment of the NDPP, the president then used a similar process for the appointment of the Chief Justice. But my more recent process for appointing the Chief Justice, a very different process was followed. So I think, Shamila, coming back to your point, there's no guarantee that the process you went to will necessarily be repeated. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there. But just to reflect, does that public process instill greater public confidence in the institution? And how does that also impact in relation to the appointments of other senior officials, both within the NPA and the SIU? Shamila?
Yeah, I think that's important because in the NPA, there's actually 4 layers that the executive appoints. the national director, the deputy national directors, the directors of public prosecutions across the country, they're all presidential appointments. And then the deputy director of prosecution, which is in the provinces, is appointed by, they are appointed by the minister. So that's a very, very heavy layer of leadership. And then at even an operational level with the DDPPs, they are very operational in the regions, taking actual decisions to prosecute. Executive is involved. And in terms of the NPA Act, the NDPP, it's only if an acting deputy national director is to be appointed that the minister does it in consultation with the NDPP. But all of the other layers below the national director is done after consultation. So you know, the views of the NDPP can be completely ignored in that process of appointments below. So that's a huge amount of top management where the executive actually decides on appointments.
Can we just pause on that point? Because I think it's important that there is a role for the NDPP to play, but it's not a determinative one.
Precisely.
But it's you know, comes back to the point that Chris was making, that there has to be a good relationship, which I think is critical with the minister responsible.
Absolutely.
So have you found what your experience that your voice has been heard in those processes?
Absolutely. I mean, we've made appointments, the president's made appointments of the deputy national directors. They were all recommendations that I made to the minister, to the president. We've had a number of DPPs in the regions that have been appointed. They've all been accepted. And I must say that one or two, they have been hard discussions, but the president eventually went with the recommendations that I made. And so that really instills a lot of confidence in me as a national director, that we have what Chris talks about, the support without the interference, and the ability to really do what we need to do. I mean, I can say absolutely freely on this public platform that the president has actually kept to his word that he gave to me when I asked him before I was appointed, Mr. President, I know that in the Constitution, independence is guaranteed, but can you, sitting across the table from me, tell me that you will not interfere in the decision-making processes of the NPA? And he unhesitatingly said that. And neither the minister nor the president have done that. They've asked for reports, which they're entitled to do. And we in the NPA decide on how much of information we would give that is appropriate in the circumstances. Because I don't think there's any prosecuting authority in the world that doesn't have some reporting line to the executive. And so, but that fine balance is really important. So the whole process of appointments in the NPA, I mean, if you have a process to appoint the NDPP, one would hope that you would have a person that has the confidence of the public, that has the confidence of the executive and the support. But after that, my view, at lower levels, particularly at the deputy DPP levels, the national director should be able to appoint those persons completely. And if you have the processes right at the top, there shouldn't be any concerns about, you know, the integrity of the NDPP in these processes in terms of appointing the best people for the job.
Yeah, I mean, I think that comes back to the issue around accountability as well. But Andy, moving on to you, in terms of the senior management within the SIU, what is the process followed and what role do you play?
Right. No, thanks for that. In terms of the legislation, of course, the head of the Special Investigating Unit, following the process that I outlined, it was ultimately the appointment of the president. But unlike in the NDPP case and in other state entities or agencies, where the executive level of an entity, and I'm talking the level below the head of the SIU, who are really going to be an executing team. Those ones are appointed by the head of the SIU. It's got the authority to appoint. So you as the head, you've got that latitude to appoint people in various positions of course, following a process that you are satisfied that they will work with you to ensure that you deliver on the mandate. So I do agree with the NDPP that, you know, as the head of the unit or as the head of public prosecution or any other agency, you are appointed almost as a CEO, and as a chief executive, you need to be able to appoint your executives that you will be satisfied and certain that they will execute. There is that kind of an element in those others that the lower level is also goes to the president because it's on the recommendation, right? And the recommendation would probably be based on having assessed whether this lower level will work with you and execute. They've got the competency, expertise, and so on. But so there is absolutely, I really don't know the rationale for having now the lower level to the CEO, call it, or the head of the entity, also go through, you know, that process up to the presidency. So for me, I think it's effective, and I think the efficiency of the process, turnaround times, so that the entity executes and executes quickly. I mean, imagine if you were to have, resignations, for example, right, of an executive or two executives. It means, you know, that process of having to go through, you know, the interviews and having to go through the other layer of, you know, of process up until the president does. Look, I'm not saying in all instances it would be delayed, but there is a potential that you would delay the organization from being capacitated appropriately, right? So I would really also advocate that, you know, capable people be appointed to head the entities and be allowed to appoint the executive team. Now, in terms of the whether the public process really would sort of win the public, I mean, it becomes a public process for a reason of really enhancing the transparency. And enhancing the transparency really goes a long way, you know, in creating the public confidence. Of course, ultimately, it's about the individual, right? But the checks and balances that are there to ensure that, you know, there's a rigorous process of interview, there's vetting process, there's integrity checks, which in many instances are either not done, and when they are done, they're really not, pursued, or the results are not really used to inform in many instances. So that becomes a problem. There should be commitment to these checks and balances, because more often these checks and balances do give us risk indicators, right? They give us indicators whether, you know, you're appointing, you know, a fit and proper person, right? We ignore them at our own risk, and when the risk realizes in the end, then we really get surprised. I want to just, you know, end up with the example of that Prof. Stone has made. I had the privilege to chair the SADC Anti-Corruption Committee, which SADC members, our peers, are members of, and Martha Chizuma in Malawi is a member of that committee. And when that incident happened to her, we all really stood up. We all stood up, and I recall that all of us almost directed a communication, you know, to Malawi, saying, no, we don't take kind to that. But that reflects on how is it that governments should not intimidate, because the way she was arrested in the morning and all of that was intimidatory, you know. So we don't really take kind to that. But I think it's really important that we are allowed to function, to make our decisions without interference, but again with integrity, and commitment to integrity should really be at the topmost, you know. But again, even during the execution of our functions, right? while we say we need to be, Prof. Stone says, no, total independence can also have potential risk and so on. And I was privileged to be part of the learning journey now last week to Hong Kong with the National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council. And Dave Lewis, I see, is here, and Ruan from GIZ. Our counterparts there, and I'm talking investigative, not prosecution. I'm talking investigative. That of course, every jurisdiction is different. There's checks and balances that they've put in place to ensure that even in the process of executing your function, there would be those checks and balances. And the checks and balances include, members of the society, professionals, business, and so on. Now, that really resonated with me that, with our national anti-corruption strategy saying, we need to strengthen the entities like, National Prosecuting Authority, SIU, and the others. But there's also citizen activism, that's been, advocated by the strategy, right? So, and that contributes to the whole of society notion that we have adopted and are busy implementing. So the role of public, the role of the society has a place in the recruitment process and also in the execution process. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Chris, I want to come to you now, and I'm going to come to the audience after this question to Chris. Chris, I'd like your reflections on what both Shamila and Andy have said, and really advocating for a more public process in the appointments. But I've also been told that in correspondence with my colleagues at the ISS, you've described this as a tricky issue, or what one may otherwise call a wicked problem in terms of what is the ideal appointment processes. A process for these senior appointments in the criminal justice sector. So perhaps just to get your thoughts on that.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, I think anyone charged with appointing the appointment process at this level understands just why this is so tricky. And I think you've surfaced, and the conversation today has really excellently surfaced the issues at stake. You need public confidence. Obviously, the secrecy or the fear about backdoor deals or favoritism in the process compromises the ability of anybody appointed to the position to work effectively and independently from the start. On the other hand, you also need the confidence of the appointing officials, and you need the confidence of the structure. That is, as I said earlier, what you don't want an appointment process to do is end up isolating the office holder from the support and the collaboration that they're going to require. None of these institutions are islands. None of these institutions can achieve their mission just on their own. They need to cooperate with others. They need the support of others at key moments, and they need leadership able to build that. So the appointment process in terms of publicity, transparency, openness are really important. But you also need aspects of these appointment processes that assure the public that you're getting people of quality, people of confidence, people of courage into the role, people who have personal weight, who bring into the role the respect and the courage to play their role fearlessly, because these roles are not easy, as all the comments today have underscored. When you start dealing with crimes or misconduct or unethical behavior by people in positions of power, whether they're in the private sector, the social sector, or the public sector, the stakes become high, and people are willing to do things to protect themselves that you might not think they would normally resort to, and you have to have the courage to push through that. You need not just a a formal process that ticks the boxes of transparency, fairness, openness. You need a process that will encourage and give people of stature, people of weight, the encouragement to put their names forward, and a belief that they'll be able to exercise their responsibilities clearly. And there's no simple formula to make that happen. It takes leadership, it takes a culture of integrity, as well as processes that conform to these principles we've been talking about.
Thanks, Chris. I'm going to stand up for questions just so I don't miss anybody that's behind the lectern here. So we've got time for 2 or 3 questions. I see one hand there. David, one more? Okay, let's go with those 2.
Firstly, let me congratulate you. I think in my congratulations, I also think this is like weakness in both institutions. The weakness typically that you don't come. I think you guys have done exceedingly well, but being in a position to know what you face, there was a designation. That's what happens. And I know that's a guideline based on right? Your success affects the whole of the nation. I think that obligation, when you ask any of them, how many arrests have been made since the Zonda Commission? There's a narrative in the newspapers, and the truth is quite apart from what the narrative is. And I think that needs, I've told Anton this on a number of occasions, that the communication has to be improved. That's just a suggestion I'd like to make. But here's the question. Both of you inherited, for want of a better expression, institutions that were decimated. I see Ivan sitting in the corner there as well. So we had SARS, we have SIU, and we have the NPA. We know, and this is being mooted around, that we have a weak state, a weak administration generally. What lessons, if there are 2 or 3 lessons you could share with the civil service? What lessons could be drawn to help the civil service? I know it's a tough one, but it'll help us.
Thanks, Mohammed. David?
Yeah, you know, Andy, the only 2 institutions in the law enforcement investigative community that survived the state capture project intact, where I think the SIU and the Auditor General. And why do you think that was the case? And do you think it was the case? Because in the end, both of the powers of both of those organizations are purely recommendatory, that you couldn't actually execute on your recommendations, and you couldn't send anybody to prison. And is that the reason why these 2 organizations came out of the state capture period in a better position than the NPA and the Hawks and the SAPS did? And to ask Chris, when he says that too much independence can also be a problem, that you need political support, is he not merely saying that if you have a lousy head of the executive, whether the prime minister or the president or whatever, that no institution can really withstand a concerted effort by the head of the executive to undermine them? I mean, if in our worst nightmares we realized that we got a Zuma, a compromised president in the next round of elections, I can guarantee you that Shamila would last a month, because it would be important to capture the NPA. And if the head of the executive wanted to do that, she can do that. And so, you know, isn't absolute independence, and I don't know how I don't think you can really guarantee it, but political support is necessary, yes, but in the face of a lack of political support on the part of the head of the executive any state can be captured. And I sort of wonder what your reflections are on that, and whether it is possible to really protect against it. I mean, civil society will, you might not believe it, but they'd actually really be very angry if you were dismissed, and so would the media. Although you could be forgiven for not believing that's the case, but it will not protect you from a chief executive absolutely determined to damage your institution.
Thanks, David. Let's start with you, Andy.
Sure. No, thanks. Thank you very much for the questions. From a communications perspective, I do agree that it's really important that we communicate. And I think we have observed that, all of us as members of the Justice, Crime Prevention and Security Cluster. But of course, in our individual agencies, we've got our communication strategies, and the government communication services. It's really one of the communication machinery for government. So yes, granted, it really has to pick up. I do often get into is it debates or arguments with the communication team that there's a thin line between marketing and really letting the public know. So it's really important that we strike that balance. And I think the improvement in that space, it's really required. I would like to really just say from what Dave has said. I mean, my arrival at SIU, having familiarized myself with the business and the kind of results that the entity has produced. I was really satisfied that none of the cases were compromised in a manner that reflects interference. Or particularly political interference. So I was really happy on that score. But I really realized that from a business perspective, the execution was an issue. And then we, of course, coined a strategy that allowed us, to execute effectively, efficiently, quickly, and produce the results. So from the point of view of effectiveness, and as I always say, we've got this business process that we've got end-to-end control on, which is when we make a finding that there's irregularities relating to a certain process, we're able to go to court and cancel the administrative decision and recover. And that recovery process affects everyone, right? So that's the extent to which it really can enable the fight against corruption in ensuring that all the corruptly acquired proceeds are returned, and returning the assets, from those who acquired them is not an easy process. It ends up really paying them, and we are satisfied that we effect that. So it does really give the effect and the consequences and the impact of the fight against corruption. Of course, it's different from, when you lose assets, it's painful, but when your freedom to life is at risk, it's probably even more painful in terms of being jailed and so on. So I would really say that the roles that all these agencies play equally complement each other. So I was really quite pleased that I spoke to my predecessor, who preceded me, and the one who preceded me. I mean, they were quite vocal in saying, they are satisfied that they were never captured, and I really was satisfied with that. That for this entity to make an impact, you require to execute without interference. Of course, integrity at the center of what you do.
Thank you. Thanks, Andy. Shamila, I'm going to give you the last words. I'm going to go to Chris first and then come to you, and I have an extra question for
I
you
just
as
want to
well.
pick up on one thing that Andy said. I didn't have the luxury of speaking to my predecessor and finding out from him whether
That was going to be my question, so I'll come into that in a moment. But Chris, your reflections on the two questions?
I'll just take David's excellent question, and of course, he's right, as usual. But that's why it's not that you can't solve the problem of political dependence. It's that senior politicians will also be making their own calculations. And that's why I was stressing the importance of people of weight. When you see the reasons, it's much easier to dismiss a lightweight than it is a real heavyweight, someone who has the respect and confidence and stature in a country, independent before they were appointed to the position. And it's important in these independent roles that if you're going to really make it rigorously independent, if you're not going to have the dependency that also gives senior political officials the confidence in a person, if they really have something to fear from those people, you need to put people into those roles and assure the selection will favor people of real weight. You see that happening in some of the European ombudsman positions. You see it happening in sometimes in the role of a chief justice, the role of a senior independent figure. That point about appointing people of weight, I think, is in the end the only guarantee that you can get out of the dilemma that David describes. But thank you again for letting me join today. And I'm sorry I have to go. I'll miss Shamila's final answer, but delighted to have been able to participate with you today.
Thank you so much, Chris. On behalf of everyone here, we'd like to thank you for your contribution this morning. So Shamila, to the final word, as I said, but I wanted to add this part of it about your predecessors. So not your immediate predecessor, but I know that you've had the opportunity to engage with Bulelani, with Vusi, who's with us here online. Mm-hmm. Have they given you any advice in terms of how to insulate yourself from suffering the same fate that they did?
I think both of them have been, I worked under both of them, previous national directors, hugely inspirational leaders. But I think I particularly say to Bulelani, he worked in a completely different time and context. And it's not Chatham House, so I can't say here freely what some of the things that I've said to him about consequences that he might face today if he did some of the things that he did then. But he was able to do things, but the context was totally different. So certainly, a lot of good advice, but sometimes it just doesn't work in the current context. And Vusi has always been a huge support and an inspirational leader who also, came under a lot of flack and attack. So, his views and support we really value. But on the issue of communications, just to say that, many prosecuting authorities around the world don't communicate much. We communicate so much, and the balance between. But I think we have a citizenry here that it demands a lot in terms of information. Sometimes when I read things in the media about investigations that are going on, I think, my word, this really should not be. And we need a more responsible media who think very carefully about what they report on in terms of ongoing investigations. There are serious challenges that we have there. But we have, Anton, you said you speak to Anton. Bulawa is here, is our head of comms, acting DDG. We communicate a lot more than a number of, but I think people just read and hear what they want to. And as long as in South Africa, they're not going to hear that one high-profile politician is not in orange overalls, then it's a challenge. But there's lots of incredibly good things that are happening. And I'm not going to go into details about that, which we do communicate about. And I can assure the people of this country that when this leadership of the NPA leaves, we are going to leave an NPA that will be fit for purpose, that will be fiercely independent, hopefully with even legislative reforms, and that the country can really depend on to do the right things at the right time. And so I think that is such an important building process for an independent national prosecuting authority. But the second part of the question was, what are the lessons? I think the one big lesson for me is things can change so fast. Don't take anything for granted. When you think of how the current president came into power with a small majority that gave us as a country the opportunity to really rebuild and those critical democratic institutions. And we forget that we worked in 2 COVID hit years, right? With the NPA with no leadership until 2022. So we have 3 years of solid rebuilding and trying to get it together. But the window is so small, and we are now going into a space where we don't know what is going to happen in the future. But rest assured, I just want to say to David that no matter who comes in, I'm not going anywhere in 1 month after that. We are going to fight because we know that good people, injustice flourishes when good people do nothing. And so whatever it is, we are going to fight to make sure that we have institutions that people can truly be proud of. But don't take anything for granted. I think that's the biggest lesson. Things can change very fast. Thank you.
With that, I want to thank Andy, Shamila. Chris has left us already, but thank you so much for sharing those reflections with us. I'm sure it's going to add a great value to the conversations we're going to have later in the day. So I think I'm going to hand over back to Gareth now.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes. Well, thank you so much again to our panelists. Rebecca Paloy, Rebecca Motibi, your inputs were inspirational, and you are the big examples of the kind of leadership we'd like to have. And to Professor Stone, all the way from Abuja, we're now going to take a tea break for about half an hour, and then we'll come back into this room, and then we'll start with the rest of the program. So please join us outside for some tea, and we look forward to the rest of the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.